Hello and welcome to the France 24 interview. Our guest today is Michelle Bachelet. She is the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights. She joins us from Geneva. Thank you very much for being with us.
Happy to be here with you, Mark.
Mrs. Bachelet, before that, you were twice president of Chile. You're also a former doctor, a health minister, so you have maybe a unique perspective on the COVID-19 pandemics. You recently said that if politics and economics drive the response to this pandemic, this could have dire consequences for health, but also for human rights. Can you explain to us?
Well, you know, what happens is that I believe that when we are facing a pandemic like COVID-19, when there's so many things we don't know about it, any decision to, for example, ease lockdowns or any emergency measures should be driven by science-based facts, very carefully, very prudent, because the risk of losing all the gains that with a lot of sacrifice for so many people staying at home, not working, health workers with a lot of pressure on the health service, etc. If we ease down just because of a political reason, because there's pressure from some sectors, or because there's pressure from businesses, and when they haven't met yet the health conditions to ease those measures, it could mean that will come a new outbreak, as we have seen in some parts of the world. And in some parts we have seen small outbreaks that can be controlled. But if you are not there yet, you haven't reached the peak yet of the cases and of the detected cases on the mortality, I mean, this virus is not going to go away. Huh? It will be here for many years until we get a vaccine. So we need to really, leaders need to take into consideration all factors. I understand. I mean, the economy needs to continue working. People are unemployed. They need income. We need food distribution, food production, etc. And those sectors are still working. And we need lots of things. But I know it's a very complex balance that a politician needs to do, a president of the republic or a prime minister. But it has to be based also on scientific facts. And it has to take all the elements into consideration, and it has to be done gradually in a way that you can be adapting schools, businesses, and other places to a reality where we don't know a lot about. We don't know if this virus is seasonal or not, if in summertime, like a flu that comes in winter, but in summer we almost don't have cases. We don't know. We don't know if it evolves. We don't know if it will mutate. We don't know the way it is. I mean, we know some ways of transmission, some others we don't know. So there's a lot at stake. So that's why we said, let's make decision in a careful, in a serious way, and science-based.
Okay.
Of course, you have to consider some political and economic issues, but it should be on science.
Right. I want to get to human rights. Many governments have declared states of emergency, have imposed curfews, lockdowns. Are you concerned about the rule of law, that some governments, some leaders might use the pandemic to crack down on dissent, on the opposition? There are a number of instances where there is strong suspicion that this is indeed happening.
Well, yes. I mean, you know, the international human rights law permits the restriction of certain freedoms in cases like the pandemic or natural disasters, etc. But we're talking mainly on freedom of mobility, freedom of assembly. But in no way it accepts and to use it as an excuse to restrict the freedom of expression, the freedom of the press, or the freedom of being the possibility of being critical if the government is not doing what they're supposed to do. And we have seen that. We have seen in some places they have passed bills and laws to restrict the freedom of criticism, to define as fake news anybody, and that has a lot of punishment or fines, or they also have been detaining journalists or human rights defenders. And in some other places, they have passed sort of a decree, not through parliament, not through the judicial system, to increase the powers that the president has or that the security forces and the military have. So when we restrict certain human rights because of a need like a natural cause or a pandemic like this one, it has to be, first of all, it has to be a clear need. It has to be proportionate to the need, and it has to have a time bound. It cannot be forever. So in many places we have seen that some governments are using it to shrink, to make even more shrink the civic space and the possibility of civil society to express, and they are also threatening journalists and diminishing the freedom of press, and that is unacceptable.
Right. I want to get to an issue that's been related somewhat to the pandemic, the issue of sanctions. We know there are some countries that have been slapped sanctions against, like Iran or Venezuela. In this time of pandemic, do you think sanctions are the right answer, just from a human rights perspective?
No, we don't think that's the right answer. And on 24th of March, we did a public statement on that regard, calling on all member states who have sanctions over any country that could limit their capacity to respond to the pandemic, to ease it or to lift it or to suspend it. And we also have been having talks with the U.S. on this regard, saying that
they're not listening.
They said that according to the rules, sanctions should. No, well, they insist that and they send me, of course, the Treasury statement where it says, it's written there, that it should not be applied for medical equipment, for humanitarian reasons, for medical devices, vaccine, etc. And they say that there is an overcompliance of banks and of companies. But the truth is that overcompliance exists. So if you don't lift it, that will be the result. They won't have all the possibilities, those countries, other because people won't sell them these equipments, or this other because they don't have the enough incomes to buy them. So I think that sanctions should be lifted, and much more should be done, so those countries would not have, the consequences that we have been seeing. It's happening on those places.
Right.
That they have humanitarian situation, but with the sanctions, these situations are aggravated.
Right. I want to get to one of the wars that has been continuing while the world is focusing on pandemic. It's in Libya. The UN recently warned of potential war crimes there, citing a dramatic increase of indiscriminate shelling in the capital, Tripoli. Clearly, it is aiming at the forces of the strongman Marshal Khalifa Haftar. Have you seen evidence that potential war crimes are being committed as we are all focusing on COVID-19 in Libya?
Well, unfortunately, yes. Unfortunately, they have not heard the call of the Secretary General for ceasefire. In some other parts of the world, they have heard it, they have followed it, or they're trying to. But in Libya, we have had no results, and it's clear that the war has continued. And unfortunately, as usual, the most affected ones are civilians. Women, children, they have attacked hospitals. So really, it's a real disaster, because many people are dying, but also there's a lot of people going through Libya trying to escape from different parts of the world where there are conflicts or droughts or a lot of famine, etc. And they are also, first of all, detaining these vessels and put it into sort of prisons that are in the worst possible conditions. And our office with UNSMIL, the peacekeeping operation there, we have made public reports saying the terrible conditions that those prisoners are there because of the overcrowded prisons, because of the lack of sanitary conditions, and of course of violence, rape, etc. So yes, Libya is really concerning, and the UN is trying to do their best to make the parties to dialogue and negotiate and stop this war.
Right. I want to
but until now, it hasn't been heard.
Yes, obviously. I want to get to an issue that's probably going to come soon on the table, the issue of the West Bank. There have been tensions between your office and Israel after you issued a report about companies doing business in the West Bank. Now, the new Israeli government is planning an annexation of the West Bank. What is your response to this prospect?
Well, I think the international community, the UN, has a clear response. Any annexation of occupied territory It's illegal, and it will not be recognized by the UN, as it has not recognized the one done in East Jerusalem and occupied Syrian Golan. And if there is an annexation, it will constitute a serious violation of international law. It would also deal a devastating blow to the two-state solution. Of course, it will close a door to a renewal of negotiations and threaten efforts to advance in regional peace. So it's clearly that for us it will be completely illegal and unacceptable.
Right. Thank you very much, Michelle Bachelet, for being with us from Geneva, and thank you for watching this edition of The Interview here on France 24.